Phil Harris and Josh Phegan come together in an incredible fortnightly podcast, Dream Big, Move Fast.
A progressive, contemporary conversation on what it takes to be a dynamic thinker, leader, and role model.
Backed with over 2 decades of friendship, trials and tribulations that teach from real-world experience and what it takes to dream big, move fast. Time is the friend of the consistent and the enemy of the inconsistent. Phil, what are your thoughts about this as an opening quote?
Yeah, great quote. I think it's, time favours those that play the long game and do the right things each and every single day. Kind of goes back to the other quote, small daily wins over a long period of time equals stunning success, right? So, sometimes doing small things every day doesn't feel like you're making progress, but if you play the long game, you add them all up, you end up in a great space.
If you think about it, entering into the pro tennis circuit, how many forehands do you reckon you hit?
That's very generous, Josh, very generous, yeah.
But how many forehands did you hit before you got to that stage?
Thousands, I think. Yeah, they call it the 10,000 hour rule, right? You don't get anyone unless you've done your 10,000 hours of training. And
just thinking a little bit about that like consistency over time always wins the race. Today we're going to have a great conversation around rapid scaling and, the power of mergers. And this is a really important thing for any business. And Phil, I remember that you and I were both in a room, and the CEO of the time was a guy by the name of Nick Dowling at Jealous Craig, and he said, why go and recruit one person when you could recruit 73? And I think at that point he was, in the midst of doing a merger and acquisition or a rebranding of an office that was going to be coming into the Jealous Craig network, and 73 people were coming on that one day. And, you and I both looked at each other and just thought, wow, that's, a really great mindset around what it is that you do. And, since we've been able to talk a lot about, the power of what a merger is and what it does, let's just talk a little bit about it. Why does a merger happen? So this is kind of an interesting thing for a business, right? Like sometimes it's an exit point, sometimes it's a growth point, and sometimes it's forced because there's something going on in the organization or in a situation which is going to require that to actually have to happen. What are your thoughts about, mergers? Like, is it an important thing for our industry to discuss, to understand valuation principles and why it needs to happen? Because I'm sure that everyone's going to have to exit at some point in their business, including you and me.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation. It's a really strange one. I don't think you never hear a podcast in real estate talking about mergers and acquisitions. It's like something that just never kind of gets spoken about.
Is it a taboo subject, or does it suggest weakness if I'm going to merge or if I'm going to be acquired?
Yeah, potentially, yeah, I think it does. I think, but also I think that probably largely in our industry, there's never really been a set of kind of standards or principles or professionality around it. And I think a lot of people, when it comes time to finally sell, there's a bit of a mad scramble to go and see the accountant. The accountant says, maybe we should catch up on the last 3 years P&L to try and make this business look relatively sensible.
By the way, there's some Div 7A issues, a couple of tax issues.
Or whatever it might be. But then, but I guess maybe based on the size that a lot of the businesses get sold, largely it's just driven by a multiplier on PM. So maybe it's not that complicated. But no, I think that, mergers, I think it's a great conversation. It's one, as I said, that I think it's a weakness in this organisation, in our industry. I'd also say up front, it's really important for people to understand the difference between a merger and an acquisition. Like we do both. Mergers is obviously when you're bringing existing staff inside your organisation, and maybe there is still still joint ownership between that organisation and yours. Whereas on the other side of that, acquisition, very different, where you're just buying the company. And yes, there might be people that come across with that, but the existing owners having no ongoing ownership in that business.
Well, what's very prevalent is that when you work in other markets like the United Kingdom, there's a lot of venture capital that's involved.
Yeah.
And so they've actually gone to buy up large numbers of brands and to assimilate and bring those together. And there's cost efficiencies associated with that. And maybe there's some better quality marketing and training prowess and all of the above that come with those things. And when we got to have a quick look about what actually happens inside of Australia, it's pretty rare for you to kind of see that level of scale where someone's buying like 5 or 6 massive brands to bring them together. Most of it is that literally you're acquiring 150 or 200 or 300 or maybe even up to 500 or 1,000 properties under management. And I think probably one of the biggest ones that I've seen was probably Barry Plant's acquisition of Philip Webb, where that was a very significant, rent roll. I think that was circa 5,000 or so.
Yeah, I heard that was probably the largest one I've heard of before.
Yeah, and now when you go and have a look at that, you realise there's got to be an important conversation around it. What are the advantages when you go to have a quick look at a merger or an acquisition?
I think speaking from experience, Josh, like the mergers and acquisitions that have been, I think first and foremost, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and it depends on the stage that you're at inside your business. So if I look at the first acquisition that we ever did, this is going back 13, 14 years ago. There was a little bit of complexity around that deal, but that particular deal was we were starting up a property management business. We didn't have property management at all, right? So Harris, going back 14 years ago, very, very different, right? And the brief side of that story is it was, going back 14 years ago, rent rolls wasn't like it is today. Like, rent rolls are very highly contested at the moment in the marketplace. Marketplaces come and go. In those days, it was about a 600 property rent roll. Wasn't that easy to sell. They wanted to sell it to us. I wanted to buy it. There was one slight complication. I just didn't have any money to buy it, right? So we had a brand that wanted to sell us their 600 rental properties. They were trading as a franchise. In the end, the way we brought the deal together was we put our brand around that organisation. They traded without any franchise fees. We were referring property into their business. So by the time we'd actually referred, I think over a 12-month period, we referred like 150, 200 properties. We actually built up enough equity where Macquarie would then come and fully fund using the existing properties that we had. So that acquisition worked out really, really well for us. But where I was going with that is that was a great acquisition for us. It was just property management. There was no sales because we had no scale. We had nothing around us. So we just wanted to get a start in property management versus gradually clawing our way. Does that make sense?
Of course it does. And so what you're thinking about straight away is that the reason why you might do a merger and acquisition is that maybe you're trying to buy cash flow.
Yeah.
So there's a pie graph of what percentage of your revenue comes in one-off revenue, better known as sales, versus recurring revenue. So you're trying to get up your monthly recurring revenue, better known as MRR, or annual recurring revenue, ARR. And that's an important conversation because sometimes the aspirational sprint of the business owner is to get to a point that the recurring revenue is in excess of the recurring expenses. And so then you have a recurring profit. And so then whatever you do in sales can actually just be pure cream. And that's an aspirational sprint. I think once you get there, it probably changes again because then you go and buy another one and then literally then there's a period of payback period to go and make that happen. Sometimes you're buying market share, right? So you've never been able to crack that market. So buying into that market and effectively it's easier to buy an established business and to find value than it is to do a cold startup in a location. Because if you've got cash flow, you've got people, you've got past clients, there might be existing leases, there might be the photocopier on the fourth year rather than the first year of its lease. So you're actually picking up some really substantial value that's coming in and you're able to buy an asset where you can substantially add some value to it. So maybe you're not paying for everything that comes with it. As an example, archive landlords. And thinking about the value of those people and the principal place of residence of where the landlords actually live and being able to generate sales revenue out of that. And no one ever talks about that in the valuation methodology on the rent roll, right? To go and look at those additional adjacencies that you can go and bring up. And it's about learning that conversation. There are going to be some challenges that people will face, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that would be the first point is what are you, and it is different for every single person, but what are you trying to achieve out of that merger or acquisition? So for us, it was like getting economies of scale up front. That's one. Secondly, you said is marketplaces. We've done that as well, is just getting a foothold into a marketplace. And then the third one I'd say is like from another perspective, sometimes it's about a sales business that's actually attached to it, because we're talking real estate here. Largely the acquisitions that most people are talking about here are rent rolls.
Yeah.
But other times we look at it, we go, you know what, it's actually, it's a good rent roll, but like there's maybe one or two really good salespeople that are part of that business. And throughout the course of the negotiation, you establish that those salespeople want to come over. You feel that you're going to get 1 + 1 = 3 inside our environment, which is they're a good salesperson there. But we think with our coaching training system, we can actually turn them into a great salesperson. So there's all kind of those different dynamics as to why you might actually look at, doing a...
One of the things that I saw that you did, which was, I should have expected it from day one, and now I've come to expect it of you. So unfortunately, you set yourself a really high bar here. And this is that thing about saying, hey, when you're going to go in a position that you're either going to be selling a business or buying a business, so if you're on either side of the transaction, what is really important is to actually do your due diligence and get things ready. And so that's about making sure that you actually have a checklist as you have got around a whole range of things. And sometimes there are going to be things that you have not even thought of. Oh, I didn't realize that, okay, when I buy it, am I buying the property managements and I'm just going to re-sign them to my entity? Or am I going to buy their PTY Limited company? And if I buy their PTY Limited company, what comes with that in terms of tax liabilities and previous things that business has done over time, and how much am I liable for that? What about employee entitlements? What does that look like? When I buy that business, am I also buying the employee entitlements, and is that taken off the purchase price or not? And how does that work out in the wash? And those things are a really important thing, because if you've never done it before, it's like a trap for young players, right?
Yeah, and we are definitely, obviously, I think we've done 4, 5, 6 transactions over the years, but in terms of our due diligence now, Josh, I'd say that we are very, very thorough. We have our pro forma checklist, which has got about 300 items on that list, which we go through. And you and I having a conversation in the car on the way here today, talking about a meeting I had with EY last week, a guy who specialised in M&As, and just kind of getting some real clarity over of getting great at that skill set. But yeah, we have a checklist. We do a whole lot of due diligence, and I'd say that we've now kind of got ourselves a structure of being pretty highly competent in that space. And I think also as well, this is a really great thing for the principals at listing. Every acquisition that you do, yes, it's important that you bed it down and do it well, but I've also found they become your referral for the next acquisition.
Yeah, sure.
And so in our marketplace, we've actually built a reputation where we've got a reputation as being a good buyer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So largely most of the acquisitions that go on, we get a seat at the table where people will come and talk to us kind of off market before a business goes to market to say, hey, would you contemplate buying our business? So you need to make sure that, one, it's about buying a business, but secondly, you're also you are going to be assessed. If you stuff that up, it'll get out in the marketplace that you're just not a good buyer.
Yeah, interesting enough, I was reading an article in the Property Industry Eye over in London, and there was this lady who was being interviewed and said, XYZ Estate Agencies is now closing down, and they asked this lady, said, why are you closing down? She said, well, I told my husband that we should have sold it 10 years ago and he didn't listen to me, and now he's died, I can finally close it. And you think about that. And so this whole idea is that what you do really well is that buying or selling a business is exactly like wrestling a crocodile. Not sure if you've wrestled a crocodile in all your trips to Darwin, but the basic idea is it will turn 200 times, right? So there's going to be more things that are literally going to fall out than not. And so for we use a very basic tool here. We draw up a little T intersection. On the left-hand side, we write down agree on the right-hand side, we write down work on. And often people are like, oh, we're not going to change our brand. No problems. We'll just put it in the work on column. But what are the things that you fundamentally agree on? Valuation principle, what's happening to facilities, what's happening with people, all of those things. And so once you get all of the other things worked out, then the last little issue is usually a thing that can actually be crossed in terms of the bridge. That most deals fall over because they don't get that first one out of the way, and that's an interesting conversation. What you did really well is that you put together a merger team. So you talk about who, for example, is on the property management lead, who's on the sales lead, who's the total deal doctor, who, for example, is going to be financing it, who's going to be doing the legal side of it. And that's a really important conversation because often what's said between you and I, by the time that gets down to someone else who's helping in the deal, the solicitor or maybe the financier, then it goes south because it wasn't what we actually agreed at when we were at the dinner table writing on the back of the paper napkin. So how important is it that you've actually got a clarity about who are the people that are going to be involved in helping you, and that you've actually got that advisory group clearly out in front of either the buyer or the seller, so they're aware of who their team's also going to be to make sure that there's no misconstruing of information or in principle agreements that have already been made. Yeah,
it's a really, really critical one. We're kind of moving through, there's phases to doing merger acquisition. There's, your negotiation, your terms up front, what you're trying to get. Then now let's say, okay, deal's done. Now we're actually talking about the transition. So it's actually having a high quality transition team is absolutely critical. And so we're going through that at the moment with multiple acquisitions at the moment. So inside that transition team, we have about 5 or 6 people that actually sit on that. We actually share an air table with the business that we are acquiring. So inside that air table is like the 155 transition points, which is these are all the things that we need to sort. They're all name allocated. So with the business that we're actually acquiring, so they've actually got a transition captain as well. So that one person is responsible on their end, so they can actually visually see everything that they're responsible for, everything that we're responsible for. So we task allocate that, and generally we have our our M&A meetings is on a Monday. So we have all of our exec meetings on a Monday, sales management, exec team, marketing meeting. And then we've also got another team, which is the transition team. They'll get together face to face every Monday for 1 hour just to work through the upcoming transitions that we're working on, and kind of a bit of a time frame on that. That team really comes into full effect, Josh, probably 30, 45 days pre-settlement, where they're really working together, and that team is really working together probably 30, 60 days post-settlement of that transaction to making sure that it's all bedded down.
Phil, you're a really healthy organisation. You know, you've got a bit of muscle, you've got some strength, you've got some good people around you. Sometimes the person that you're buying, you're actually buying a sick business.
Yeah.
And so like literally, so they're lacking systems or processes, or the key person that was running the business is no longer around for one reason or another. And or it's a quick transaction, you know, so something's actually happened and there's an opportunity and you can go and pursue it. I was talking to a lady the other day, I think she was buying 400 or 500 managements or something, and they were in this position, they were doing the deal and everything was coming together, and they're like 2 weeks out. And it was the onus was on the seller to actually go and re-sign the managing authorities across to the new entity. And they'd only done 10 out of the 500. And she was losing it. She's like, oh, there's 490 that have to be signed in the next 2 weeks, and that's not going to happen. I said to her, there's always ways of actually understanding how you're going to go and negotiate that. You can go and do it on their behalf and charge a fee associated with that. You can do it in groups, you know, so it's like, 50 managements at a time that are actually going to come across, whatever that might look like. But actually understanding that not everyone on the other side is going to be super healthy. How important is it for you to understand that when you're buying a business that, expect that there will be issues during the course of the purchase process?
Yeah, I think, unquestionably there will be issues. So you need to allow probably, and that's why if you can, that's why you need to have a bit of muscle around you. There's got to be some flex space. So on that transition team that we've got, there's people who can carry the slack if something goes wrong, right? So obviously expect the best, but prepare for the worst, right? I'd also say though, inexperience, that kind of makes me kind of cringe a little bit. If you're buying a business and it's 2 weeks out, we've got, 10 managements signed out of 400 or 500, this deal was 2 months prior. This should have been dealt with 2 to 3 months out, right? Mm-hmm. So you're starting to already feel that whoever is kind of controlling this transaction, there are things here that haven't been done well at all. Mm-hmm. So I think I would say kind of where people first and foremost go wrong is, number one, is they just don't have a plan. There is a 363 points of a transition and if you don't know what they are,
yeah,
then clearly this issue of the management agreements, in our process, that's going to be picked up right at the start of the process, mm-hmm. right?
And if you're not able to fulfill on the basic promises, then why would we?
Then it's going to go sideways.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, we've had, we've done well on both. We've had one horror story where we had, one property manager where we do a key person risk, key analysis. The biggest risk when you buy a rent roll is the property manager. Is there a property manager who's not an owner of that business who potentially could go and leave and go somewhere else and rip a portfolio? That's one thing we've had in the past where we underestimated the significance of a property manager. The property manager didn't come with the acquisition. They went down the road and ripped 70 properties out of it. Now, we were protected because we had a clawback in that contract, but only because of experience we were protected. But for the person selling that business, it would have been devastating, and that was one thing that we overlooked. So I guess we've gotten better at looking at the risk analysis on an actual acquisition of understanding what they are. But I think there's two sides to transaction. You're either on the buy side or you're on the sell side, right? And both of those have two very different checklists in terms of preparing for battle, right? I had dinner with a friend on, last Saturday night? My wife and I went out to dinner, and they'd actually, real estate in the industry, they just sold a business not that long ago. And I found it was a great story. I was taking mental notes when she was speaking. They just prepared their business for sale. And 4 months prior, Josh, to putting, small rent roll, 250 properties, they went out and lifted their management fees across the whole portfolio. They went through one by one, so not a blanket. They looked at the fees and they said, you know what? We're about to sell our business, right? Why don't we actually just go through and actually put our fees up to where they were? And then they said, we're going to take a risk. If people don't like it, whatever, we're just going to do it. Anyway, they ended up, out of a portfolio of 250 properties, they had 2 people that actually kicked up, and they were 2 clients that they didn't want anyway, that had always been hard work, pain in the neck. They got the fees to where the fees should have been. They re-signed 250 managements 90 days prior to going to market, right? So 90 days prior, re-signed 250 managements, put the fees up, and it ended up being an additional $400,000 in bottom line on the contract price based on the multiplier because they got the fees up. So this is why this conversation doesn't exist in real estate, but there is a real strategy if you're on the sell side for how to get yourself prepared to sell, just as if you're going to buy, looking at the risk analysis, making sure you're prepared. And when I heard that, I was like, far out, that made me think about our portfolio here, about what's the quality of your current agreements that you've got in place. Have you got, what about all those landlords you're currently managing that you don't even want them anyway? So if you don't want them anyway, get the fees up to where they should be. But for a lot of us, like, how much money is being left on the table for people selling businesses? Because like the story you just said, they didn't get the agreement signed up. You haven't got the fees where they should have been. You've got an untidy rent roll and you'll pay for it.
Phil, we happen to be recording at your office today, and we were walking past, the Great Hall, and in the Great Hall, there's a 3 values that sit up there very clearly about Harris. It's like grow as a leader, work as a team, think like a customer, right? And I pride myself on knowing those, by the way. But the interesting conversation,
sometimes you know them better than I do.
Yeah, but you start thinking about that. Is it like when you're bringing together cultures? Is that also a challenge too? That like how are they going to feel at all of a sudden they're a part of this other organisation, and what are their perceptions or fears? Either real or imagined that they've got coming into the organisation.
I think the cultural blend is actually the hardest part.
Mm-hmm.
Like, largely speaking, as I said, we're talking real estate today for M&A. So most of the people listening to this, the M&A is really purely based on a rent roll. Let's call it for what it is, right? Generally speaking, someone's buying 2, 3, 4, 500 properties. So landlords and tenants, culturally, whether they're Harris or another company, that general set of behaviours is going to be pretty consistent, right? The cultural merger is the hardest piece.
Yeah.
And I would say that is the part that of the M&As that we've done so far, we're getting better. I don't think we've quite got it right just yet. I was introduced, I was in a meeting the other day, which was, as I said, with EY purely about mergers and acquisitions. And one of the interesting things they told me that they spoke about was about actually really clearly defining the culture at day one. I think they call it, and I can't remember the term they call it, Josh, it was performance fatigue employment lethargy. They spoke about it is real, right? Employment lethargy. And employment lethargy is basically saying and by the way, when they're talking large scale M&As of like 1,000 staff, not,
sure,
buying a business with 6 staff or something.
Yeah.
But there's a danger, and when you bring people across that aren't culturally aligned inside your organisation, if you don't deal with it up front, and then gradually you let someone go at week 1, and then you let another person go at week 3, that puts employment insecurity amongst the whole team, and that's what creates the lethargy. So I think it is very, very important that you do make some cultural decisions up front. That, the other thing we've learned as well through our M&A experience is that, like, don't forget, people are joining us. We're not joining them. That's the reality of it. So to a degree, you are joining us, so it's our culture and it is our way, right? So I think that we could have been firmer in some of the transactions that we've done about the way that we do things, as opposed to trying to appease everybody, because we've certainly learned there are some people that don't just come on that. But that's the part that regularity in meetings, same again, if I just kind of go through that kind of risk profile list of a merger, who are the key people? So if you're buying a business with 15 staff, you don't need to win 15 over, Josh. There might be 3 or 4 inside that organisation, that tipping point. We've spoken about that before. Who are the 3 or 4 people that you do need to win over? If you win those 3 or 4 over, the other 10 or 15 will come along that journey. So who are those key people? Number 2, I'd say, is like, who are the 1 or 2 that shouldn't come across, right? Who are the ones that are actually going to be destructive against the deal? So you've got the key people who are influential. You've got the key people that should not come across. And if you don't deal with that up front, then you're going to pay for it. So how are you going to deal with that? And then thirdly, I talk about the meeting rhythms and consistency. Nothing beats relationship of just getting in front of people eye to eye, belly to belly. And we've also found, particularly around, there's something to do with whatever the magic of training is. Okay?
Is that what I am, a magician?
Yeah, you are. So if you've got a new team, right, the best thing you can do to bond a team and get them on board inside Harris is provide great training.
Yes.
Right? Just so it doesn't matter whether they're a property manager or a salesperson, they've just come out, all of a sudden they're getting great training, because I think every human being feels more liberated when they're growing. It takes their focus off of, when I signed up for this company, I never agreed to be a part of Harris.
Sure.
I'm a hostage. I'm a prisoner. I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah.
So the sooner you can get people out of thinking about their own issues and their own problems, and then they start thinking about what their potential future is because they're being trained. Oh, great, here's how I can improve my listing presentation. Oh, here's my career progression as a property manager. So you've got to get people out of their own issues into a bigger, brighter future. The sooner you can do that, then I think that the culture starts to blend. But we're far from perfect in that space, and we're learning.
You know, the interesting conversation I look at straight away, though, is about actually understanding there are going to be some phases. And one of the probably last phases of the transaction, well after the deal is actually done, is actually finding if there's any unrecognised value. So, you know, because I know what we've actually paid for in terms of the cash flow, but is there additional things like, are there any archive landlords? Where do they live in terms of their principal place of residence? How many of those archive landlords now have another property they'd like to bring across? Are there any past clients that are literally sitting inside of that business? Could we go and ring them? Are there any tenants that we've got? Is there any talent that's coming across, or any other key relationships the business might have had with like a developer or something like that literally we could now be monetizing? Does that usually get us left behind because people are too focused on just trying to bed it down or solve the issues or deal with the challenges of that next stage of size of business that they've got that they've never had before?
Do you want the real answer?
Yeah, I do. We'd love the real answer.
I think in the industry that we're in, most businesses that go to market, it's like there's very little thought in bringing it to market. It's just kind of like, see my accountant and I'm flogging my rent roll. It's disarray. There's a multiplier, get to settlement, there's an exhaustion and everybody's out.
Yeah, sure.
You know? So that next level of conversation of about all the additional is just like, we're just trying to bed this thing down. We're not even contemplating worrying about archive landlords or relationships or whatever it might be. I would say that's largely, but I would say some of the ones we've done has been brilliant, and we're going through one of those at the moment where, you know, very successful older salesperson now selling his business. He's got great relationships in an area, doesn't really want to sell a whole heap moving forward, but we're happy to stay on and be a mentor, a key referral partner. There's a whole lot of extra value add that are inside of these deals that, and we are guilty as anybody, Josh, of leaving that value add on the table.
Final principle today, 44 weeks in a year, 25 billable hours in a week. Phil, what are your thoughts about that as a principle in, you know, you as a sales agent or as a person in really getting clear about how many hours you're prepared to work in front of clients and versus operational marketing type time and actually having 8 weeks worth of annual leave per year?
Time is ticking. Get very clear on what matters and what's just noise.
And I was thinking about it. If you think about that you've got 52 weeks in a year to make revenue, you're deluded because there's going to be a geopolitical event, a flood, a fire, an election. There's always something every year which takes people out, and you're not going to run at full operating capacity. But if you think, how do I take a 52-week year and bring that into 44 weeks of performance? So I can have 8 weeks worth of annual leave or 8 weeks to be able to go and deal with those issues. That makes a massive difference. And then in my hourly rate, I can only have a maximum of 25 billable hours per week because the rest of the time is market expertise, is training, is growing, is developing, is getting ready for what's ahead. If you do that stuff, it changes everything about the way you go to plan. Feeling good and ready for more? Thanks for joining us
On Dream Big,
Move Fast.